And we're going to be talking about John's project, The Men Who Would Be King. Do you want to grab a copy of the book to show? I selfishly didn't allow time for questions in the first talk, but I will do my best to do so this time so that you can ask a question in the audience as well. Maybe we can just display this for people. So welcome, John. I will just briefly introduce John, and then we will be talking about his new publication, his new book that's published by Dewey Lewis, The Men Who Would Be King. So John is a British photographer who's based in Bath and who focuses on long-term projects that relate to the impact of history and geography on people's lives. And I think this is your second book.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, second book.
And your first book, Empire, dealt with 4 remote British overseas territories, and that's also available with Dewey Lewis. But we're here today to speak about The Men Who Would Be King, which has just come out for Paris Photo, and which deals with a rather astonishing kind of contemporary phenomenon of that takes place in Vanuatu in the South Pacific. So just to kind of situate this, how did you first find out about this phenomenon and make your way to Vanuatu to start working on this project?
Thank you, Mark. Hi everybody. So this project, you could probably say, has been quite an evolution over the last 7 years. It's something that I began in 2014, and I'd been working on the work for my previous book, Empire, which was looking into these places that exist in the South Atlantic. I then thought it would be good to switch oceans for some reason, and I'd heard about this prophecy that says a divine man from outside will come to the islands of Vanuatu. So we're kind of deep South Pacific here, and I didn't really know how or what I would find by going there, but I wanted to kind of investigate and see if there was a way of telling a story, and this concept that's kind of derided as cargo cult in common Western media. Where this divine man from outside, where in many cases on the islands has manifested as an American GI from the Second World War. In other areas, it's manifested as Prince Philip. But the key common belief on the islands is about somebody who will come and help sweep away the missionaries and the colonial governments, the imperial powers that were France and Britain at the time. And there was this ceremony that takes place out on the islands that I was interested in seeing whether it could be interesting and whether I could make something out of it. And I felt that it would be really important to try to collaborate with a writer on this, because I was well aware of all the imagery that would come of these places and what I'd seen before. And I felt that if I worked with a writer, we would be able to unearth a bit more of the depth to the history of it. And so I feel like this... this book is really key, that it's very much a collaborative effort between myself and a writer, and I really felt it was key to have both of those elements in there. Anyway, so Q 2014, I went out to Vanuatu to experience this sort of ceremony that takes place where, you find people raising the American flag and sort of celebrating the return of this divine figure. And when we were there was this sort of whispers around the place that somebody from the White House had come along for this ceremony. And so we were kind of waiting for this mystical person to turn up, whoever it was going to be. And it turned out to be a guy called Kevin. And he'd come from Boston with a film crew to document himself being the fulfillment of the prophecy. and naturally slightly peculiar. You know, we came away from this day. You know, this guy Kevin, he he basically turned up to this island and he'd handed out necklaces with his face on to children, and started saying, you know, John Frum, this prophet, you know, he will come, kind of thing, and we went away that night and we sat with an Vanuatu lady called Ketty, and we were talking to her, and we had this conversation about, you know, this guy coming in, and she just sort of said, you know, you Westerners, you're not even looking at us anymore, you're just looking at yourselves. And it kind of sparked this imagination in us, you know, about what else there could be. And so we started digging, and we started to find other people that were going out to these islands and trying to be something perhaps that they're not back home. And we came across a gentleman called Claude, who is from Nice, and he was part of this royal family on the island. And we sort of came across this character, and we just started to unearth all sorts of different people. It's an incredibly complicated project, and as soon as you get me going, I just won't shut up. And I'm really aware that we have such a limited amount of time. So, Mark, I will lead back.
Yeah, and I think this is Claude, that we just saw, if I'm
Correct,
not mistaken,
yeah.
And we've seen Kevin as well appear in a tiki bar in his hometown of Boston at some point.
We thought it would be important to go full circle.
Right, and. I'm interested. So you mentioned the collaboration with Christopher Lord in producing this book. So can you talk a bit about the process? Did you both travel together? Did you kind of collaborate from the very beginning of the project in, you know, finding the subjects to photograph and research and interview?
Yeah. Absolutely. We very much went, you know, from the beginning, it was the pair of us traveling together. I traveled separately as well because I felt that I didn't want the story visually to be completely literal. I wanted there to be other imagery that brought the story to life. But because otherwise we just didn't know the direction it would go in. So we traveled together quite a lot, and it was interesting, the things that we unearthed. You know, when you go out somewhere visually, you're looking in a particular way, but when you're with somebody that's looking for story, you know, you both got two minds, and you know, it's a really, like, working with a writer who isn't thinking visually at all. I'm purely, you know, sort of the two coming together was sometimes absolutely glorious because we would find things we'd never otherwise find, and other times it was very frustrating because you'd go on, you know, you'd have an idea and you'd go on a wild goose chase for something, you know, like the necklaces that Kevin gave to all of these people. I spent weeks trying to find this bloody necklace, and you know, and you just go on all these wild goose chases to find them. And then I would be thinking in my mind, I want to be out photographing. I don't want to be finding a necklace. But it was, you know, it was sort of the balance of that was tricky, and the amount of content that we had at the end was huge. You know, how did we pull together my photographs, Chris's story? How does he deliver that story? And we also had a lot of ephemera that we come across, which you will see within the design of the book. How do we interpret that within the book? And how do you design something that makes it make sense?
Sure. And is that something that you set out to do from the beginning, to kind of try and integrate this archival material, whether it's old publications or photographs or documents? Is that something you set out to do, or that you kind of discovered along the way?
I'm one of those people that things just evolve, and
Right.
you know, I just sort of I think to myself, you know, I couldn't have planned this project from the beginning. There's just no way. You know, I went to see if something might work. I thought if it was a disaster, I had an interesting holiday, and so you know, but as we went along, we kept finding these things. You know, I met a guy on an island who gave me an entire archive of imagery from the Second World War, because there was an enormous US presence in the 1940s there. That was integral to the belief, you know, part of the belief systems that you have on the islands. And you know, we then unearthed all sorts of other things as we went along. So it was a complete evolution. And so when it came to trying to tell this story, we ended up working. We very much, for years, I wanted to work with Anya Neleka Milak, she's a fantastic designer, and I'd approached her with the story and the topic, and she just had this magical way of us bringing it all together, you know, and into the design that we have, and she was very conscious of representing photographs and representing the text and the history and binding that together somehow.
And I think there's one other aspect as well that's another layer in the book, which is the voices of the Ni Vanuatu and sort of their just their take on this, you know, what's referred to in a kind of derogatory way as a cargo cult. And I think that also kind of mirrors, you know, the photographs and the fact that the project doesn't just focus on this kind of white savior, you know, fantasy, but there also is very much their perspective that's involved, and I guess their take on this myth and their current reading of all of that. That's also very important to the story.
Yeah, we thought it was absolutely integral that we had voices from the island, you know, and sort of unearthing that, because I'm so aware of how delicate this kind of a topic is, and how the sort of the vision of looking in on people and could be, and how that can be perceived, and also we were so conscious of it, sort of not only us looking in, but everybody looking out as well. You know, these people that live on an island that have these constant arrivals, and how they've dealt with that, you know, sort of how they've dealt with the, you know, the imperial powers just landing, how they dealt with the arrival of the Second World War, you know, the absolute war machine that turned up in the 1940s. And so we tried to bring out a lot of the conversations from people that we'd met along the way into the book, to try and create that sort of balance of the conversation. That we were really, we've been so conscious of that all the way through, and I really hope it's reflected in the way that it comes out.
And did you ever feel like yourselves that you were participating in this kind of age-old process of, you know, the two white men going to Vanuatu to how did you contend, or what were your discussions around that issue?
It's so funny because it's something we've been so conscious of right from the beginning, and how, you know, I mean, it was 2014 when we first went out there for this weird and wonderful journey, and how we would contend with that now, you know, how we would think differently about it now, I don't know. I've certainly been really conscious of it, and which images that I would select for the book and why, and I just wanted, you know, we kind of got to a point where we wondered, you know, how it looks, like you say, two white guys going out to Vanuatu to photograph a Melanesian culture, you know, so how do you tell that delicately in the right way? And when we'd found all of these protagonists in the story, we just kind of felt we had to tell this story, you know, somehow. We felt it really, we've always been fascinated about it, and trying to get people to, you know, the Daily Mail can do a version of this story where it's really derogatory, and it's just like, look at these people that think that Prince Philip is a mountain god. You know, isn't that wacky? And yes, there's an appeal to that, and I can understand, you know, I get all of that. But also, why? You know, it's like a complete backlash against colonial governments that turned up, and you know, it's a bid for freedom. It's a bid to return to their, you know, their way of life, sort of pre being bombarded by missionaries, and you know, and the British and the French turning up there. And the confusion that goes with all of that too.
Yeah, and I think it comes across in the book that, in a sense, you know, the same lens is used for every subject, whether it is, you know, the locals or the people that see themselves as these white saviors, or, you know, it has this kind of just very observational feel that I think helps with that, you know, with that complex story and with understanding all of that. Okay, well, I did promise that there would be time for one question from the audience. So don't let me down, audience. Does
Just
anybody
one.
have a question for John?
Oh, I'm safe. Looks like I'm safe from harm.
Otherwise, I have more.
Oh, God, okay.
Hello, thank you. I just wanted to know our relationship you have with the designer about the book? You contribute, what kind of discussion, or you let the editing as made only by the designer, or also with the writer? How do you process? Thank you.
It's a really interesting process when you have a photographer, a writer, and a designer, and a publisher, because I've got my reasons for how I would sequence images, and we're aware, there's 15,000 word essay in the book, basically, so there's a huge amount of text in there. And I really wanted, when we worked with Anya on the book, I really wanted her input. I knew that she would have this way of visualizing it and disturbing things in a certain way. And a lot of the conversations we had, when you go through the book, in we call them the pink pages. So we had all of, the pages inside here. We really wanted to use all of the ephemera that we'd found, but Anya had this wonderful way of making it look like a kind of scrapbook and not making it celebratory about the things that we had in there, sort of using it to sort of sometimes quite comedic effect and sometimes just really plucking out things that were, visually fascinating. And to see her vision come on board it was really liberating, actually, because I think when, I don't know, I'm sure lots of you know, as a photographer, when you're deep into a project, sometimes you can't see the woods for the trees. And I'd kind of, it's been years in the making, and so for me, I started to go a bit mad with it. And to have somebody so wonderfully creative and intelligent to come on board and just go, I'm going to bring this to the table, it was wonderful. And sometimes, I would show to the writer, Chris, and he'd be like, what on earth's going on here? I don't understand. And then he'd be like, oh, crap, okay, Anya, he thinks this. And then it was like, oh, but what about this? And so sometimes it was like I was in the middle of trying to, it was interesting having three people involved, basically. But so content with how it ended up being, and I hope that's reflected, as I said, it's quite a complicated book, but please do have a look at the stand, because, you have the chance to read the text, it brings everything to life and it helps you understand it all. So, it feels a bit of new territory having such a large amount of text in a book too. And so I hope that balance is there when you read it. But
great. Thank you very much, John. Apologies for making you compress a 4-year project into 15 minutes.
7. 7.
7-year project.
But that's fine. I appreciate it. Otherwise, I'll just waffle on.
You can see the book on the stand of Dewey Lewis, and also John is going to be signing copies tomorrow at 2:30 on the booth, SE8. So you'll have a chance then to ask him some more questions and to spend some more time with the book. Thanks very much.
Guys, thank you for coming. Thank you very much. Cheers, Mark. Thank you.